I'm told this is a historic occasion. John just whispered to me as we sat down there that this is the first time ever that the first ministerial contribution to the National Economic Forum has started on time. So I'm starting, hopefully, the way I mean to go on. I'm sorry I'm not able to stay for the whole morning. I've got to get to London for a rather important appointment later on that I can't really be late for. But I'm delighted to be here this morning to see so many of you here. I'm glad that so many of you have managed to battle through the weather this morning to get here, but it really is great to see such a good turnout. I'm joined here today by a number of other ministerial colleagues. I think there's 9 of us here today in total, and I really hope that gives a very strong indication of how much we as government value this opportunity to engage with organisations and individuals right across the country. We want to ensure, and I'm very keen to ensure, that in future an even wider range of people get a chance to participate in the National Economic Forum. So I'm able to confirm to you today that some of our future forums are going to take place outside of Edinburgh. The next one will take place early in the new year in Dundee, which will give an opportunity for a wider range of people to come along and participate, and hopefully we'll have more benign weather conditions on that morning. What we want to do this morning is use this opportunity to continue, and I hope to broaden, a dialogue which I started last week when I spoke with business leaders at SSE headquarters in Glasgow. And the dialogue we want to have is one about how we, all of us, business, government, the third sector, trade unions, and the wider public sector, can work together much more closely in the future to create a more competitive and more prosperous economy, and also to build a fairer society. 2 objectives that I very much see as mutually supportive. It might be worth just reflecting at the outset this morning that our task has, I think, been made more difficult by the Chancellor's autumn statement last week. It is quite a sobering thought that over the next 5 years, our share of the cumulative real terms cuts still to come is estimated to be approximately £15 billion. And of course that figure excludes cuts planned for welfare services across the UK. So that's the backdrop against which we are having this discussion, and it remains a very, very challenging one. The Office of Budget Responsibility has shown that the further cuts planned by the UK government will reduce government spending as a proportion of income to its lowest level since the 1930s. So again, I think that gives us just an indication of how difficult a climate that we will continue to operate in. Real terms cuts in spending on services like education, justice and social care over the 10 years ahead will total almost £1,800 a person. The lowest earning households have been and are likely to continue to be amongst the hardest hit so far, and that's despite the fact that low growth over a period of years now and low earnings growth have caused the UK government to miss its targets for reducing the deficit. And that reinforces the belief we have as a government that badly targeted austerity policies fail as a policy, are failing as a policy, and cause harm to our economy and to our communities. It's one reason why we sought much greater wealth and job creating powers of our own from the Smith Commission. But our focus this morning, and I want to emphasise this point, our focus this morning, and indeed for the remainder of this Parliament, must be on using the powers that we do have, and any new powers that do come to Scotland as a result of the Smith Commission process, to make Scotland a wealthier and a fairer nation. Our programme for government, which we published 2 weeks ago now, set out how we intend to do that over the coming year. The programme for government very deliberately placed a heavy emphasis on supporting business. It is our absolute intention as a government to continue to invest wisely and well in infrastructure, to support innovation, improve skills and maintain the most competitive business rate system across the UK. We will also do everything in our power, working with all of you to promote Scottish businesses and Scottish products right across the globe. And I do think after the tremendous year of increased international profile that we've had as a country, we are incredibly well placed in the months and years that lie ahead to really up our efforts in terms of international promotion. The programme for government, though, also set out our desire to create a fairer nation, not just because equality is a desirable outcome in itself, although it most certainly is, but because a more equal society is essential for the long-term health of our economy. Just yesterday, the OECD published some analysis which highlighted that the long-term increase in income inequality across most developed countries has significantly reduced economic growth. And that evidence, I think, substantiates findings from experts such as Professor Joe Stiglitz and from the IMF, who looked at 173 countries over a period of 50 years. And the findings are very, very clear. Countries with more equal societies enjoy stronger and more sustainable economic growth over the long term. The programme for government therefore set out measures to mitigate the consequences of Westminster welfare cuts, but much more importantly than that, in terms of lifting people out of poverty, it set out proposals to tackle in-work poverty. We intend as a government to take very focused and concerted action to close the attainment gap in our schools and ensure that people from the most deprived parts of our country have the same chance of going to university as anyone else does. I make no apology for wanting to be able over the next few years to shatter the glass ceiling, ensuring that all women have a fair chance to contribute to the economy. We want to, and I know I'm shared in this objective by everybody in this room, to create a society which genuinely offers opportunities for all. In all of this, our job as government is to very clearly and very firmly lead by example. That's why I was so delighted just a couple of weeks ago to appoint a gender-balanced cabinet, something that the United Nations have hailed as a step that others should emulate. We as a government will also continue to lead by example on the living wage, paying that to everybody we directly employ, and we'll use our procurement processes as far as we legally can to encourage others to do so. Last week I also took steps to strengthen the remit of the Council of Economic Advisers in order to sharpen the policy focus on the two interdependent goals that we are setting: a more competitive economy and a more equal society. And I'm very pleased that Sir Harry Burns, former Chief Medical Officer, has agreed to join the Council, that Crawford Beveridge will remain as Chair of the Council, and that we'll continue to benefit from world-leading expertise offered by Professor Joseph Stiglitz. And I'll announce the full membership of the refreshed Council of Economic Advisers very soon. So government has a central role to play in all of this, and leading by example is one of the key roles that we do have to play. But one of my key messages today is that government can't do this alone. The role of government is important, but these economic and social ambitions that I'm talking about, we need the contribution of others, including all of you in this room, to help us to achieve them. We need buy-in and support from the wider public sector, the third sector, from trade unions and from businesses. I think we're very fortunate in Scotland, and it gives us an incredibly solid foundation to build on, that we already have a very strong ethos of partnership that we can harness in tackling major challenges. People in Scotland generally and genuinely want to operate as part of a Team Scotland approach, and I think this forum is a very good example of that. We're also very fortunate that already a large number of companies recognise that progressive employment and social policies are not just good for society, they will also enhance their long-term competitiveness and profitability. We'll be hearing from several of these companies over the course of this morning, and I very much hope that their example will help to inspire others who want to do more but who maybe need some additional help or support to do so. For example, Craig Hume from Utopia Computers will talk this morning about their commitment to the living wage. And that is, I've mentioned it already this morning, and I make no apology for coming back to it, The living wage and advancing the living wage in Scotland is an issue which is critical to tackling in-work poverty. You know, more than half of the working age adults who live in poverty in Scotland are part of a household where someone is in work. In 2012, almost 60% of all children living in poverty were living in a working household. Low wages are causing very high social costs. We are working with the Poverty Alliance to promote accreditation of companies who pay the living wage. We've already got 70 companies signed up to the accreditation scheme, and we hope to more than double that to at least 150 by the end of 2015. The living wage is one of these policies that, in my experience, virtually everyone accepts as being desirable in principle. But I recognise, and I recognise very, very openly, that some businesses face genuine difficulties in moving to a living wage position. They need support and help to do so, perhaps need to phase that in over a period of time. So what we're trying to do, in addition to leading by example, is promote and share some of the experiences of companies which now pay the living wage. Jenny Stewart from KPMG is here this morning. They introduced the living wage as a minimum for all of their employees in 2006. And since then, they've found the extra wage costs have been more than met by lower absenteeism and higher staff retention. Turnover amongst their contracted cleaning staff, for example, has more than halved in the last 8 years. And Utopia, that I've already mentioned, demonstrate that these benefits can also apply for smaller employers. In September, they became the first Scottish computer manufacturer to commit to the living wage. And they've decided that the living wage isn't just good for the economy as a whole, it's also good for their business's reputation and for their bottom line, which is crucial in a business sense. Female equality in the workplace is another example where I think businesses can learn from each other. That is first and foremost an important principle. All women, like all men, should have a fair opportunity to fulfil their potential. But again, as with the living wage, there's a fundamental economic point at stake here. The fact that talented, skilled and committed employees face barriers to their participation in the labour market holds back our entire economy. That's why a major increase in childcare is at the very centre of the government's plans for this Parliament and indeed for the next Parliament. And that policy is something that the CBI called for last month when it published proposals for a better off Britain. And they recognise as business leaders that it's a policy that can benefit individual businesses across the country. At the moment, women are overrepresented in lower paid professions. 57% of women in work are in lower paid professions as opposed to 37% of men. But women are underrepresented in the workplace generally, and they are particularly underrepresented in boardrooms and in senior positions in companies. In addition to that, rates of female business ownership are persistently lower in Scotland than they are in other developed nations, and that's one reason why the Scottish Government has established an action framework for women in enterprise, the only one of its kind in the European Union. If as many businesses, and this is quite a sobering point that we should all reflect on, if as many businesses in Scotland were owned by women as are currently owned by men, that could boost our GDP by as much as 5%. So that is the economic value of greater equality in the workplace. Achieving gender equality in the workplace is therefore one of, not the only, but one of the most important ways in which we can increase economic growth. It's an objective of government, but it should also, I would argue, be a business priority for every company in the country. And I'm delighted that Margaret Gibson from Women's Enterprise Scotland will talk about their work to tackle the gender gap in employment and enterprise. And finally this morning, NVT is going to talk about their role in taking on modern apprentices and supporting more than 300 volunteers while helping to establish and look after the IT infrastructure that was needed for the Commonwealth Games. You know, the efforts of companies like NVT ensured that the Games didn't just leave a physical legacy of new stadiums and transport infrastructure, they also created a human legacy. They provided jobs, training and volunteering opportunities for young people right across the country. So these are just some of the companies and organisations from right around Scotland that are matching progressive employment practices with business success. There are many others in the audience today and right across the country. So what we want to do is to discuss with you how we embed these approaches further. And there are two initiatives that I want to mention before I finish this morning, which we set out in the programme for government, which we believe can help to achieve this. These are the Fair Work Convention and the Scottish Business Pledge, both of which are designed to encourage and embody the sense of shared endeavour that we want to create in building a more prosperous and fairer country. And we want all of you and your colleagues outside of this room not just to sign up to these initiatives, but to help us shape these initiatives in the months ahead. The Fair Work Convention, as you are all aware, was a key recommendation of the Working Together review, which was led by former Enterprise Minister Jim Mather and reported in August. The review group included representatives from National Express and Tillis Russell, together with trade union and third sector members. And the report focused on opportunities for improving productivity, and it recognised that many countries which currently outperform Scotland for productivity involve and engage their employees at every opportunity. So the report recommended a further shift towards a model of industrial relations based explicitly on partnership, with unions, employers and government recognising their interdependence. And perhaps its most important proposal was the establishment of a new body to promote that shift. We'll consult very closely with business, trade unions and others on the composition and remit of the Fair Work Convention. I know Rosanna Cunningham has already started some meetings to take this process forward, and we expect to make more detailed announcements early in the new year. Our current thinking is that the Fair Work Convention will encourage dialogue between employers, unions and government at a national level. It will highlight good examples of progressive workplace policies and then promote these examples across the country. And as part of that, it will very clearly acknowledge the difficulties and challenges that businesses can face as they adapt to new approaches and help to set out how those difficulties can be overcome. One of its key roles will be to support the living wage. It will have a very strong focus on providing information and raising awareness so that companies of all sizes in all parts of the country can recognise that the living wage benefits businesses as well as employees. And all of this, it will be a powerful advocate for the partnership approach, which typifies so many of the most successful European countries and which already characterises industrial relations in Scotland at their best. In order to develop that partnership approach still further, we intend to introduce a Scottish Business Pledge during the next financial year. It's important to note, I think, that last year our enterprise agencies provided help and advice to around 12,000 businesses across the country. 2,500 of these received intensive support. These businesses already benefit Scotland each and every day, creating employment, boosting our balance of trade. A high proportion do that by adopting progressive workplace policies. And we know that there are others, many others, who would like to do more, but would benefit from help and advice. So we intend to establish a Scottish Business Pledge. Companies will be asked to commit themselves to good business practices, such as innovation and internationalisation, and to good employment practices like the living wage, gender equality and workforce engagement. And in return, those businesses will get more intensive support from the Scottish Government and from our enterprise agencies. And the principle of the pledge is really simple and straightforward. It enshrines the idea that just as government will work with business to create a prosperous and strong economy and business environment, so too can businesses play a part in delivering a flourishing and fair society. So today very much marks the start of a discussion about how best to develop and implement that pledge. We need to consider quite carefully what its scope should be, how broad that scope should be, and we also need to consider, again, quite carefully whether making conditions too restrictive would deny support to responsible, progressive, job-creating businesses. That is not in any way our intention, but we also need to ensure that the pledge makes a difference, that it creates a meaningful incentive for business. So it has to be very much about not just what businesses can do, but what government can do for employers. So we'll also consider and we'll be seeking your views on what more we can do to help you innovate, export and expand. So for all of these reasons, the pledge isn't something that can be imposed by government. Instead, it will need to be developed in close partnership with employers. And that, to conclude, is the entire purpose of this morning's session. It gives us a chance to meet, to discuss, to consider what more we can do. We're already doing a considerable amount, but what more we can do to meet those objectives of a strong, growing, competitive, prosperous economy and a society that is getting fairer. And what I'm looking to establish very, very explicitly is an agreement, a partnership, a compact with the Scottish business community. We'll support a strong and competitive economy in everything we do so that government and employers together are able to support a fairer and more prosperous country. We've had in Scotland, I think, one of the most incredible years in our history as a nation. And the referendum campaign in particular, I think, demonstrated just how strong the appetite is from people on both sides of that debate to create a better country, to put it as simply as that. Obviously, we disagreed on whether independence was the best way to achieve that, but we probably agreed on much, much more. So in the coming months, what I want to do and what I want the entire government to be doing is working with you, not to focus on what we disagree on, but to build the common ground around what we do agree on and what we can work together on. I want all of us to be using the participation, the energy and the enthusiasm that we've seen over this year and harness that to tackle the day-to-day challenges we face in our economy and in our society. So gatherings like this one are a fundamental part of how we do that, and in fact a fundamental part of how we do business as a government. So that's why I am so delighted to welcome you all here today. I know you will all contribute very constructively this morning to what will be a very successful session, and I look forward to hearing the outcome of your discussion. So thank you very much indeed and enjoy the morning.